when we first started having some conversations, you shared this analogy of the river. And it was a parable that was adjusted to specifically talk about caring for vulnerable children um, by someone named Jason Johnson. So, can you give us a picture of the river and how that gives people an idea of the many different ways that people can support vulnerable children and their families?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this parable of sorts is one of the quickest and easiest ways for people to wrap their mind around how they might get involved or to find that tug in their heart of where God's calling them. And if you're interested more in some of Jason Johnson's writings, you can definitely find more information about the parable. But it kind of goes like this. So if you can imagine that you and two friends are standing at the banks of a river, and to your horror, you find that there are children floating in the river, right? Not just a few children, like hundreds of children are floating down the river by you. So naturally, your instincts tell you to jump in the river and start grabbing children. So you do. You jump in the river and you grab children as fast as you can and pull them onto dry land. One of your friends looks downstream and realizes that this river is going towards a waterfall. And if those children make it to the edge of the waterfall, there's no hope left. Like we've lost them. So your friend runs downstream to try and stop as many kids from going over the edge of the waterfall as possible. While your other friend looks upstream and wonders, wait, how did these kids get in the water in the first place? Like if there are kids floating by us at this spot, then something must have happened up there. And your friend runs upriver to try and figure out how are kids getting in the water and how do we stop it. So in this image, we have three friends who are doing radically different jobs. And they rightfully should be doing different things. If they were doing the same thing at different points in the river, then it probably wouldn't be impactful. They have different jobs that are equally important on different places of the river. And those children that are floating at the center of the river with you jumping in, that really represents foster care, right? There are children who are floating in the system who need to be brought onto dry land. But many children don't get pulled from the water. They float in foster care for many years, ultimately floating down towards what in foster care we'd often call aging out, where there are many children who grow up in foster care. Their biological parents have their rights terminated. They need an adoptive home, but they don't ever get an adoptive home. And they end up turning 18 and aging out of the system without ever having been adopted. I mean, just for context, like here in Wake County, people estimate there's probably about 50 or so young men or women who age out of foster care every year. And that waterfall of aging out is really, young adults who age out, more than half of them end up homeless on day one. Um, many, some people estimate as many as 70% of the girls who age out in some communities get picked up by traffickers almost immediately because traffickers prey on the vulnerable. The addiction rates are through the roof. Incarceration rates are through the roof. Early pregnancy. But if you follow the thread of young men and women who age out, even you can pull it all the way down to 20 or 30 years less life expectancy. The waterfall is those young men and women who age out. Whereas the friend who goes upstream of the river, that is where we would say is family stabilization, preventing kids from coming into foster care in the first place. Like, how do we engage with vulnerable families so here in Wake County, there's about 475 kids in foster care currently. Those are kids who've been removed from their families because of neglect or abuse. And those children only represent a fraction of the open cases. So the open cases meaning there was a report of neglect or abuse. Social workers went out and investigated. And most of the time, they find children and families in need, and they decide not yet to remove the children. So the vast majority of open cases are families that are still intact, that we are hoping and praying that those kids are never actually removed. Because if those kids end up in the river, it is so much harder to actually, it's so much harder. It's more costly. It's more traumatic. And it is rare that we can actually get kids back home. It is so much better for everybody if kids never end up in the river in the first place, if families are stabilized and families stay together. So there's incredible nonprofits and people who are working to try and keep families together. So in this analogy of the river, we have very different roles, and there's all different places along the river that we need people strategically positioned, right? Like we dream of a day where there is, you know, not just three friends along a river, right? There's hundreds of churches and nonprofits that are all strategically placed along the river, doing their own unique role in keeping families together, making sure there's enough foster or adoptive homes, changing the outcomes for youth aging out. Because ultimately, the river itself, right? The young men and women who age out of foster care, the reasons why they struggle, like incarceration, addiction, early pregnancy, are also the reasons why families fall apart in the first place. It becomes cyclical, where we have kids who are coming into foster care because of homelessness and incarceration and trafficking, and then we also have kids coming out of foster care who struggle with the same things. So it becomes a broken cycle within our community. And until we have enough churches, nonprofits, and people strategically along the river playing their own unique part, then we don't ever break the cycle.
So we spent a lot of time speaking primarily to that middle of the river,
Hmm.
jumping in
Yeah.
and saving as many kids as possible. And do you have a few practical, like for someone who's trying to go, like, whether it's an individual or a church
Yeah.
that wants to be upstream and help keep children in their families,
Yeah.
and downstream, help them from going off the waterfall?
Yeah.
What are a few practical things that they could do now?
Yeah. That's great. Um, One practical that to not neglect at the center of the river is the support for foster and adoptive families that are doing it. Many people don't realize how many foster parents burn out very quickly because being the one who jumps into the river and getting kids onto dry land is painful and hard, and it's often lonely. A lot of foster parents feel lonely. So one thing at the center, and we don't neglect the center of the river, right? That is just part of being the family of God, being part of having that our Father's DNA is that we don't watch kids float and do nothing. Um, but if there are families in your church who are doing it, who are jumping in and pulling kids, then what can your church be doing to support them well? And what can you be doing? Right. A lot of times we help churches build what's called wraparound teams, which are people who are committed to supporting foster families really well as they do it. So there are ways of helping be an advocate or a champion in your church to create systems and structures to help care for the people who are doing it, who are jumping in at the center. So that is a very practical way where even if we aren't fostering, we can really be making a real difference. And then when looking downstream, there's great nonprofits in our community that are creating mentorship, housing, employment, transportation issues. Right, there's all these barriers for young men and women who've aged out that cause exponential struggles in their life. But the biggest struggle and the biggest poverty is usually relational, right? Like a housing or an education barrier or a transportation barrier. Those things can be overcome, but they are usually not overcome by young men and women who have no relational support. If they don't have people who walk with them and care for them, we like young men and women who age out of foster care can go to college entirely free, but yet only 3% ever graduate from college. Right. And so it's not because the opportunity to go to college isn't there. When I think of when I first went to college, how many times I still called my parents when I had a bad day or when I bombed a test And I was like, man, I just did so poorly on that thing, or I just slept through class and I feel like such a failure. But my dad could be like, shake it off and go to the next one. You're fine, right? But how many times a young man who aged out of foster care, like me, bombs a test or misses class and is feeling like a failure and has nobody to call or no one to dust him off and put him back in, and they end up dropping out and moving on, just because they don't have the relational support that we're all meant to have. So being somebody who gets involved with those different nonprofits, the different people in the community who are trying to help, becoming equipped and trained for what does it look like to love people well, and not for a short while, right? Like this is not, like a young man who's aged out of foster care and is trying his best to go to college doesn't need somebody to have coffee with him once or twice, right? He needs someone to be a real champion and a real coach, to walk with him for years, to really be a form of family, a place to show up on Thanksgiving break. A lot of young men and women who aged out, they're sleeping in their cars during when college shuts down, right? College shuts down for a few weeks, they're sleeping in their car. Um, if they're lucky enough to have a car, right? These are how ultimately they don't end up making it to the finish line, because of all these vulnerabilities that they don't have someone to call, someone to fall back on. So being somebody who says, hey, I'm willing, like I can't foster, but I can do this for somebody. I can be the person who picks up the phone at 11 o'clock at night when they've had a bad day and they're thinking about, um, you know, quitting their job or quitting, and they just need someone to talk to them and give them some real positive truth in their life. So that's a very practical downstream. And then upstream, there's incredible nonprofits who are helping work to stabilize families. The first one that comes to mind is the friends of mine at Safe Families, where Safe Families has a few chapters around the state where they're working hard to try and support families well, and they need family coaches, people who be trained to coach families and mentor them. They need safe families, is what they call the families who are trained to care for children temporarily. So they need people to be trained to do that. They need people who are willing, again, to not just step in for a bit, but to be somebody who will walk with a family who's struggling, be a true and authentic friend to them, to be family alongside them, and cheer for them and support them and pray for them, which is not an easy task or a light task, but it's something that is very much needed. It's very much a void. One of the biggest that I see here in North Carolina is a willingness for people to get involved in the messy and beautiful ministry of being people who walk with biological families who are struggling. So, upstream and downstream, there is plenty of opportunities for people to find their place. There's also all kinds of other opportunities, like um, being a GAL. A GAL is a guardian ad litem, which are volunteers who are assigned to kids who are in the foster care system to be an advocate within the court system. So a guardian ad litem would be meeting with children and meeting with foster parents and meeting with social workers and basically being an unbiased third party who's evaluating the case and making sure that social workers are doing what's in the child's best interest, that the kid's voice is being heard well, that the foster parents are accountable and doing their part well, and just being another person who is tracking this case and advocating if something is not going well. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of times where a case is not going as it should, or a child is lingering in the system longer than they should. And the guardian ad litem is evaluating and writing a report that the judges take very seriously. And it's a volunteer role. Most counties in our state do not have a full GAL team. There's many kids who do not have one assigned to them simply because we don't have enough. And it's a very simple way, with an hour or two a week, to make a real impact in a child's life, to get to know them, to hear their story, and to be a champion and an advocate. And that's just a few examples. But right, there's a wide river of opportunities to get involved, whether it's with organizations like Lifeline that are doing, family coaching and running programs in churches, or Baptist Children Homes has some great friends of mine, or Watch Me Rise is running trauma trainings and creating resources for parents in the community. And there's a big network of people who are trying to help. And regardless of what kind of capacity you have or what you feel like you can or can't do, there's a place to get involved. Whether it's as simple as like making a meal for someone who needs food, um, helping get kids to appointments like by loving and serving a foster family, or whether it's walking long term with a single mom who's struggling and being for years being a friend and support to her. No matter what we feel like we can do, that there's a place along the river for it.
So I always love to get back to extra practical. And so for someone who's coming to Agape, they watch these videos, learned. Do you guys have like a resource list of different nonprofits and things where they can evaluate those different ends of the river?
Yeah. And I'd say the best place is there is a collaboration that Agape helped form alongside some other people in the community. And that collaboration is called RDU for FAMS. FAMS standing for Family Advocacy Ministries. So it is a collaboration of different nonprofits and churches who all consider themselves to be part of the puzzle, we say. It's like Agape is one piece of the puzzle. We are training and licensing foster homes. But there's all these different pieces of the puzzle that ultimately form the river, right? Where we are creating the resources, we are creating the network of support that exists for families that are struggling and foster families and youth aging out. And RDU for FAMS is really the champion of bringing together the who's who and the what's and how are the different ways that people can serve. So there is a website that folks can look at, which has a directory of all of the different nonprofits and what they do and ways that people could get involved, because there's many trusted partners is what we'd call it, like legitimate Christ-centered people who have a piece of the puzzle that they're trying to do well. Often one of the biggest things they're missing is people who are willing to get involved uh, and get their real life involved in serving as part of that ministry, right? There's a lot of believers and a lot of churches that want to buy backpacks or they want to buy gifts at Christmas. But what we need is for people to get their feet in the water, get their feet in the river. So whether it's with Safe Families or Lifeline or fostering through Agape or mentoring youth aging out through organizations like Hope and Vine or Tamarisk, there's all these trusted partners that are helping equip and mobilize people to get their feet in the water and start doing something. And RDU for FAMS is 100% the best place to learn more.
So something that I think would be helpful, you've already given some examples from your own journey as a foster parent and an adoptive parent. Looking back at the journey of being a foster parent, what is some support that you didn't have that you wish you had or would have made that process better for you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I look back, I, like many foster parents, struggled with a little bit of that superhero mentality where the feeling is often not if you start to struggle, but more likely when you start to struggle, people start to wrestle with, well, I thought I felt called to this. I thought that I was going to be a good enough parent for this. I thought that I was a good enough person. I thought that I was a good enough Christian. And all of a sudden I feel like all this sin in me and I feel like I'm just failing my kids and um, I don't feel like I'm enough for this. When we start to struggle like that, those feelings can start to be isolating if we don't bring them up, right? Like when you walk through the door of church on Sunday morning and everyone around you is like, yay, you're an incredible person. You're like so heroic. Like you're doing this wonderful thing and you guys are amazing. But inside you're like, I don't feel amazing. I feel pretty awful, actually. And if I even tried to explain to you what was happening inside my head or inside my heart, you wouldn't believe me. And if I even tried to tell you about the crazy stuff that just happened in my home a few minutes ago, you wouldn't believe me. So instead of trying to let people in and trying to explain it, when people ask how you're doing, folks are, most foster parents are like, oh, well, fine, because it's just too much. It's too complicated. Like I couldn't begin to let people in. And I think that is for me, when I look back, one of the biggest mistakes that I struggled alone for too long. I struggled silently and didn't let people walk with us. And it's not that I don't think people wanted to. I think I just felt like it was too complicated and too messy. And also felt like, well, this is my mission. Like God called me to this. So if God called me to this, then I need to bear the weight of it on me. When really, I don't think anybody's supposed to bear the weight of this alone. Like this is something that we need people around us. We need community. We need the body of Christ. We need folks to understand their place along the river might be supporting the foster parents who are doing it. So I took too long to let people in. And that um, left me and my wife and our kids with more struggle and more of our own pain than was necessary. So I think one of the things I learned was foster parents need to know before they get started that this is going to be hard and that they're going to need community and they're going to need support. And when they start to struggle, it's not a reflection on them or their character or their calling. It's just the big sign that they shouldn't be doing this alone, that the mission is too big and too heavy, too complicated, and they need community. They need support.
No, that is huge. Something that in our early stages of being foster parents, and we also took one short-term emergency infant placement.
Mhm.
Uh, People are much more apt to help in the very beginning
Mhm.
when they see the adventure and the excitement of it. But the day to day, when it comes to like just struggling through those things, um, it's just how we're wired as humans. We have enough problems in our own life that we easily lose track unless there's something set up for continual support.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? Like something set up for continual support. That is something strategic and thoughtful, which is what foster parents need. Like I will often help pastors and communities and churches understand that here's the analogy I often use. Like if you were standing on a boat in the middle of the ocean and there was those raging seas out there and you knew you were about to throw somebody overboard into that water, you would put a life jacket on them before they went over. And we know that foster care is like being thrown into uncertain waters where you're going to get hit by wave after wave of emotion and fears and practicals of appointments and trauma behaviors and visits with biological parents. And you're going to have all your fears and insecurities. And if you are about to go into the water, you would want that life jacket on. And the people throwing you overboard would want to put a life jacket on you. And that's what supports and relationships are. It's a life jacket that keeps you afloat, even in the midst of the mission. So people need the life jacket. They need to be willing to put it on before they get in the water. And their church and community around them needs to say, we're going to be your life jacket. You're going in and we're going with you.
That's so helpful. And so I have one question that's going to kind of transition us out of this bucket and into the final one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is important before we get to church leaders for individuals. So someone who is looking to create a ministry at their church, like we're going to spend some more time, like what it looks like from the church's side. But like, how would you encourage someone? They notice the church isn't doing anything specifically to support foster families, adoptive families. What's just a simple, practical way that they can move and
Yeah.
get that going?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, if you are a person that is at a church and you're looking around saying, my church does not do anything to to engage with the foster care system or this crisis, or my church has no place along the river. Uh, One, don't be discouraged. I feel like that's most churches. For most churches, they typically have a foster parent or two in the church. And the mentality is kind of like, oh, that's cute that they do that. That's a really beautiful thing. But it's just a thing that a few people do, mostly on their own. And where it's not really understood and not really supported. So it's very typical. But it's also very typical that there are people in the church who are wondering and God's moving on their heart and believing that their church should be doing more. And practically for those folks, like one, be encouraged that uh, that your church can be a place where this is happening. That your church can be a place that has a place along the river and is serving vulnerable children and families. And real practically, like don't try and do it alone. There is really great people who want to support churches, and you can't really do it alone without having folks at your church be on the same page, having unity across staff and leadership and members of the church who want to be a part of this. And there are also pastors who want to see this happen, but they can't really do it alone without people in their church that have capacity and vision and energy to do it. So it takes everybody, and it takes some steps of intentionality to create the environment in the church where this can start to grow. And that's the other thing, practically, is that it does need to grow. A lot of times we have this hurry in our heart to see something established at our church. And churches can put time and energy into forming a foster care ministry. We're like, hey, we're going to have this beautiful foster care ministry. But ministries can be built and can disappear just as fast as they're built. Whereas what's necessary is not a ministry. What's necessary is more of a culture where the church is living in alignment with God's heart towards the vulnerable, where they understand that this is not something that they get to pick and choose when it's important. That loving and serving children who are vulnerable and families that are vulnerable, this is a long, messy mission, and it's meant to be part of the DNA of the church. And that takes time. It takes time and intentionality to build a culture where this is normal. And that is something where church leaders and pastors and church members that are dreaming, it just takes some extra support and extra equipping and even extra unity with other churches around you that are still trying to fumble through their baby steps of doing it. And realizing that your church is just part of what God is doing, right? Like there is a big picture of what God is doing to reach the families in our city. And there's not any one church or one nonprofit that's going to solve the problem alone. Like this is something that we get to do together. So if you're somebody in a church who is wondering that, you can reach out to Agape. To me, I love getting churches equipped and supported. RDU for Fams is a beautiful network of different people who are helping, and events for people like you who are wondering, what can my church possibly be doing? How do we get started? There's good people who want to walk with your church and get you connected to what's happening in the big picture, and making sure that you get the long vision of the next 3 to 5 years of shifting culture into alignment with God's heart.